I had always been aware of the deep web. You hear the craziest, most fucked up stories from people who have the balls to explore it. Websites that involve human experimentation, hiring a hitman, and even watching people through their own security cameras. It's fucked up, but honestly, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't just slightly interested. Now, just to point out, there was no malicious intent behind my exploration of the deep web. I was just curious to see if it really was as bad as people said it was. The first thing I stumbled upon was a website extremely centered around death, which gave me a really uneasy feeling, so I didn't hang around the webpage very long. It takes quite a bit to freak me out, so it's safe to say I was a little surprised that I couldn't even stomach the first website I clicked on. But hey, it's not supposed to be all unicorns and rainbows, right? Next, I click on a website that was dedicated to watching people through security cameras. Most of the screen showed empty living rooms and patios. Some of them showed oddly filled rooms, like rooms that were packed with stuffed animals, and another that was eerily decorated with fucking Christmas lights and fake Santa Claus statues. Another screen showed a young woman doing yoga. That one had a lot of views. I didn't watch that one very long. Something inside me felt ill, and just wrong, like what I was doing was sickening. I shook my head, blinking away any more curiosity before I hovered my mouse over a tiny X to close the window. Right before I pressed the mouse, I saw a blue link under the black screen that said proceed with caution. I bit down on my back teeth, yelling internally to leave the page. Don't click the link. It's not worth it. It could be murder. Would that make me an accomplice? What if it was someone skinning an animal, or some shit like that? But then again, what if it wasn't? I don't know what the hell propelled me to move my mouse away from the window, hovering it over the link instead. But that's where I ended. My curiosity always got the best of me, and no matter how twisted my stomach felt, or how strong the feeling of dread was that lingered right above my head, I had to know. I really just had to know what the link led to, or I would go crazy until I finally figured it out. So I pressed my mouth down and watched the link turn purple. I felt my mouth go dry, and watched as the screen slowly loaded. The page was comprised of a large screen, like the security camera page, only it was just one. The room was concrete, it was dark. There must have been a night vision camera or something because everything had a weird blue-green tint, but you can tell there was little to no light. There was a dark liquid on the floor in a medium-sized puddle. I told myself it was gasoline. Don't ask me why. Movement in the far right of the screen caught my attention, and I immediately peeked in my desk chair, inching my face closer to the screen of my laptop. It looked like an arm, like someone's forearm. They were standing there, not really moving, but subtly swaying, just enough to not look completely still. "Hey," I said before shaking my head and slapping my mouth shut. Stupid. Then the person walked. They walked over towards the left of the screen. I felt my stomach knot, felt my throat tingle and tighten, bile rising in the back of my throat. I knew my mouth was open, gasping, and my eyes were wide, face screwed up in an expression of pure disgust. It was a young woman. She looked like she couldn't be older than 25 or so. Long, dark, and dirty hair was in tangles, like she'd been pulling at it. Her leg was dragging, her other skinny leg doing most of the work as she limped weakly. Her head was down, looking at the floor, and the sound of her dragging her foot across the concrete echoed in the silent room. I didn't think it could get any worse. I was so fucking wrong. Suddenly, the woman raised her head, and it looked like it weighed a ton on her tiny body. I hadn't noticed it before, only able to barely make out the side profile, but now it was clear as day. She looked around, eyes watering with tears, and black makeup streaming down her face. Small strands of blood threads were intertwined with her lips, messily tied, locking them together. Dark blood stained her chin, probably from where she tried desperately to open her mouth to scream, before realizing she couldn't. Her dainty fingers were stained as well, the same color as the puddle on the concrete. My whole body felt weak. My stomach was sick. I had tried to tell myself it was fake, that it was all a big hoax. My eyes scanned to the bottom left of the screen. 5,623. 5,623 people were watching. Unable to fight any longer, I ran straight into the bathroom, puking my insides into the toilet bowl. Everything in me felt disgustingly wrong and twisted. Once I was finally done, I laid on the floor of the bathroom, letting the cool tiles try to soothe my burning body. My head was spinning. I kept repeating to myself over and over in my head that I shouldn't have clicked that link. I should have left. I could have closed the fucking window and told my inner curiosity to go fuck itself. Instead, I was laying on the floor of the bathroom, reeking of vomit, and my mind was a complete mess over the hell I was supposed to do. Should I get the link and send it to the police? Should I call them now? My first instinct was to copy and paste the link, just in case, then call the police to inform them of what was happening. Maybe they could trace the IP or something. Maybe they would recognize the girl and know where to start looking. Maybe I should save her life. I'd feel really fucking dumb if this was all fake just to get views. But I wasn't about to gamble, not with what was at stake. I ignored the dizzy feeling flooding my head as I jumped up, grabbing the doorknob and twisting it a bit too harshly. When I flung the door open, my phone buzzed in my pocket, scaring the living shit out of me. I stopped, mid-panic, and picked up with shaky hands. I saw my girlfriend's name and immediately slid to answer. My voice was a complete wreck, my eyes finding the screen where the girl shrunk down to the ground. The sound of her cries bouncing around my room, making my body feel rigid. I had nothing left to throw up, but I still felt so sick. Madeline, you're not going to believe what I just fucking saw. What? Are you okay? Have you been crying? No, I'm not okay, I answered, averting my eyes from the screen. I know you said to stay away from the deep web, but are you kidding me? Her voice went from caring to mad in a split second. I told you to stay away from that place. You never listened to me. You never fucking do. There's a girl, I said weakly. She's trapped in a basement or something. Her mouth is sewn shut. There's blood all over her face and hands. I don't know what to do, Madeline. The woman's cries got louder, more desperate, more muffled. I'm so sorry. Close it out, clear your history, and never go back there again. I'm not kidding. But should I call? No! Her voice was stern now. You don't know if it's bullshit. It's probably staged to gain disgusting viewers. Apparently like yourself. People do it all the time. That's why I said it'd be best if you stayed away from there. You could get yourself in a lot of trouble. I didn't say anything, wordlessly walking over to my desk. My hand shook as I raised my mouth to the small X once more. My eyes watched the number of views slowly tick higher and higher. Before I closed the window, I felt even worse than before. Okay, we can file a report tomorrow, just in case. But for now, go to sleep, and stay the fuck away. I can't believe you even went there in the first place. I didn't have the energy to argue with her. Guilt plagued my whole body, drowning me. It was all I could feel. I told her goodnight, that I was sorry, and that I loved her before I hung up and made my way to the couch to sleep. Or try to sleep. I didn't feel right even being in my bedroom, or being anywhere near my computer. Not while that girl was still trapped, unable to scream for help. Unable to talk. I know it could be fake, but was that really a risk I was willing to take? I looked up some Google searches over what was fake on the deep web, and read multiple stories about staged webcam videos, which made me feel a little bit better. It didn't make me sick. Guilty feeling go away though. It's safe to say I didn't get much sleep. Every time I closed my eyes or even began to drift off, I would see the woman's face, the thread laced into her lips, the blood staining her mouth, her fingers, the floor. I continued to grow more and more anxious and uneasy, deciding that maybe getting out of the house, heading over to local CVS and picking up some melatonin might help. I threw my blanket off, slid my shoes on, and grabbed my keys and wallet from my nightstand. The cool air felt amazing, and did wonders to calm my whirlwind of thoughts in my head. I went to check the time, realizing I left my phone at home. Not a huge deal. The store was only a few minutes from my house. I ended up buying melatonin and a stronger sleeping pill just in case those didn't work. I also got a pack of bottled water to help rehydrate after I vomited up all the contents in my stomach earlier. By the time I got home, I felt much better, which lasted about 3 seconds before I noticed that my front door was wide open. Now, I may have been in a state of shock and panic, but I never ever leave my front door open or even unlocked. My heart immediately began to race. I got out of my car, closing the door quietly and unlocking my trunk, grabbing the crowbar I keep in there. "Who's there?" I yelled into the house, waiting for any response. "Who is in there?" My own voice was shaky and weak. I was met with a complete silence, keeping the crowbar up and ready to strike. I walked to the couch and felt for my phone. As soon as I found it, I hit the emergency button and waited until I got a hold of 911 operator. Letting her know that I think my house is just broken into, she told me the police would be on their way. After checking around the house for anything odd, I decided to give my girlfriend a call, letting her know what had happened. The phone rang, and then rang some more. After getting her voicemail, I hung up, knowing she was probably be asleep this late at night. I waited about 20 or so minutes for the police to show up and walked around with them like a scared puppy as they checked every room. They ended up having me just fill out a report telling me that they'll keep patrol cars in the area just in case anyone else gets hit. As they were leaving, I checked to see if Madeline had called back yet, but there wasn't any missed calls. I, however, did notice several outgoing calls to her phone. Outgoing call to Madeline, 3:12 a.m. Outgoing call to Madeline, 3:14 a.m. Outgoing call to Madeline, 3:17 a.m. Outgoing call to Madeline, 3:20 a.m. And then another one at 3:56, which was around the time I'd gotten home. My mind went into an automatic panic, knowing for a fact I did not make those calls. I quickly checked my text, reading one I had apparently sent at 3:23 a.m. "Hey, can't sleep. Gonna come over. Mind leaving the back door unlocked so I can get in?" I didn't send that message. My stomach dropped. My heart thudded loudly in my chest as I noticed her reply directed underneath. "Sorry, I was sleeping. Thanks for waking me up, by the way. Lose your key again?" "It's unlocked. Don't be late." Without a second thought, I jumped up, running to lock all the doors and windows of my house, keeping my crowbar tied in my hands as I ran to my car. I drove as fast as my little Civic would allow all the way to her house, ignoring any stoplights. It only took me 3 minutes to get there, but I knew it'd still be too late. I made my way to the back door, feeling every cell in my body burn when I saw it was wide open. My face was hot, my hands were shaking, but I stepped in. Crowbar raised like a bat, ready to swing. I tried to keep my emotions at bay, but I looked around at her dark house. "Madeline," I called out. "Are you okay, baby?" Nothing. Silence. "Madeline!" A small scream came from her bedroom, just up the stairs. My legs jerked to run as I flew up the stairs, slamming her door open. I looked at her bed, her empty room, confused. I heard the scream again, only this time I heard it was coming through her computer monitor. I felt numb as I looked at the screen, noticing the same website I saw earlier, only instead of one woman, I saw two. The first was laying on the floor, not moving, in that dark puddle of liquid. I recognized the second girl, just as I had recognized her voice. My heart shattered as I saw her face, streaked in blood. The same thread was sewn into her eyelids, locking them shut. Her screams hit my bones, surrounded my body. It was all I could hear. Her face was twisted in pure terror. I cried pathetically as her voice began to go out, continuing to grow weaker and rasp. I locked my jaw, picking out my cell phone and dialing 911 for the second time. Only this time it barely rang once before the deep, gravelly voice of another man answered. "You should not have called." Chills shot down my body, and I heard the phone thud as it hit the carpeted floor. My breath hitched in my throat as I bent down to pick it up, hanging up the call and racing down the stairs. How did he do that? How did he redirect my call away from the police? I felt my heart race as I darted out the back door, in a frenzy, as I sprinted to the closest house. I pounded on the door, screaming at the top of my lungs until the neighbor opened it, her face tired, confused, and scared. She let me in, and I explained through frantic tears what happened. I'm typing this on my phone to post, as we both try to get a hold of the cops, but neither of our cars are going through, and neither is her landline. I think someone is messing with her cellular signal. They may have cut her line, but we're going to keep trying. I'm scared for me, I'm scared for my girlfriend, and I'm scared for my neighbor. I don't know what's going to happen to me. If you don't hear from me again, please take this advice and experience to heart. Stay away from the deep web. For fuck's sake, please, please stay away from the deep web. I don't know how many of the dead appeared before I started to take note. It started small. Insects. No matter where I went in my house, I'd come across a dead fly, or a spider. The house may have been new to me, but it had been built decades ago. A bit of a pest problem was sure to be expected. I wasn't even really bothered the first time I saw a dead mouse, but the dead kept getting bigger, and after a few mice, I graduated up to a big old disgusting rat. The one that really got to me was the cat. It was a mangy thing. Clearly its last moments were its best. I came home from work and found the poor little creature stiff as a board, laying on my kitchen floor. I buried it in the backyard. When I got home from work the next day, I was startled by a loud thud coming from upstairs. It was like a large sack of potatoes falling from a hook. A crash of something heavy just completely giving out all at once. I wasn't able to find anything upstairs. I had checked every room twice. Just when I was about to give up, I saw the drawstring which lowered to the stairs to the attic. So I grabbed a flashlight and slowly made my way up. It only took a moment to spot the dead human body. It was lucky that the man died when he did. If I hadn't heard him falling to the floor, it might have been weeks before I discovered the body. He was a homeless man. The cops searched the attic thoroughly and said he couldn't have been living up there for very long. There wasn't any sign of it, at least. They guessed he probably broke in to try and escape the cold for a few hours, and he just never left. When I told them about the cat, they agreed with my hypothesis that it belonged to the homeless man. It was sad, really, like an elderly couple married for decades suddenly dying one after another, in a close succession. With his cat gone and buried, he must have not felt that he needed to keep on going. You would think that the death of a homeless man inside my home would drive me from the place, but it was quite the opposite. While the shock of the event had deeply affected me, I felt compelled to stay in the house, rather than flee from this recent tragedy. I took a week off of work, but I didn't leave my house once. I didn't do a whole lot during that week. It was like a break from reality. I quietly made tea and would sit on my couch staring at the wall for hours, lost in my own thoughts. The only real break was from the frequent shouting matches overheard from the next door. The middle-aged couple next door had been fighting since I moved in. Things had really ramped up during that week though. I'd hear yelling and slamming doors all the time. It was only natural that the couple who disrupted my peaceful meditation would also be responsible for finally driving me from the house. I was drawn out of my thoughts one night by the squealing tires of a car quickly accelerating. A few minutes later, there was a frantic knock at my front door. I opened it to find the wife from next door. Tears streamed down her face from two bruised eyes. She apologized for imposing on a stranger, but practically begged me for help. She didn't know how long her husband would be gone, but she needed help to escape this marriage. For the first time in a week, my own troubles vanished from my mind, and I sprung into action to help someone. We rushed back to her house, and she quickly packed her things. I helped her carry the bags and load them into my car, as nosy neighbors watched from their windows. We rode in silence to a shelter where I hoped she could get the help she needed. For the first time since the homeless man's death, I felt good. It was refreshing to be out again, and I feared falling back into that trance-like state I had spent the last weekend if I returned home too soon. So I got a bite to eat and even saw a movie. When I returned home, her corpse was on my couch. I stared at it for minutes, completely dumbfounded, before my mind started to race. There wasn't any sign of a struggle in my house, or visible injuries on the woman. Besides, though, I had already seen when she first arrived at my door, but it was clear she was dead. No rise or fall in her chest, skin was pale, her eyes open but unmoving. There was no sign at all which would indicate how she died, or more importantly, from me at least, how she ended up in my living room. I don't know how long I stood there staring at that dead body, but once again it was heavy pounding at my front door, which brought me back to reality. I heard the all too familiar screams of my next door neighbor, the dead woman's husband. He was relentlessly banging on the door and screaming that he knew I was in there with his wife. It all began to click. He did this. I didn't know how, but it was the only possible explanation. One of the other neighbors had seen me leave with his wife and must have told him. Somehow he had tracked her down, murdered her, and snuck her body into my house. It didn't really make sense, but it was the best I could come up with. The pounding on the door didn't stop. I feared that he would soon break it down, and I'd be joining his wife on the list of murder victims that night. Luckily, one of the noisy neighbors came to my rescue and must have called the cops. The sound of the sirens outside was music to my ears. I watched through the peephole as the police talked the madman down, handcuffed him, and led him back towards one of their cruisers. The man broke down in drunken tears and blabbered about how he just wanted to know where I took his wife, so he could give her a proper apology and promise he'd start to turn things around. A few moments later, he was placed in the back seat, and one of the cops was knocking at my door. He wanted to come in for a moment and get my statement. My eyes darted towards my living room, which was right around the corner and still contained a dead body. It was about then that the husband's words really started to click with me. He spoke about the future he wanted with his wife, starting over, quitting alcohol, and going to get help with his rage issues. Not exactly the words you'd expect if they knew their wife was already dead by their own hands. "No," I told the police officer. "I think I'd rather come outside. Get some fresh air. This whole thing was pretty scary." I slipped out the door and shut it tight, praying that the officer wouldn't force me to let him inside. Thankfully, he didn't have any issue with it. The second squad car backed out of the driveway, taking the husband away as I told my end of the story to a note-taking officer. I guess cops are used to people being uncomfortable because he didn't seem to have any problem with my horrible uneasiness. After what seemed like hours, he thanked me, handed me his card, and he left. My mind was racing. I just covered up a possible homicide. I'd stood there speaking to a cop for ages and failed to mention that there was a dead woman inside sitting on my couch. I turned the business card over in my hands as I contemplated calling him back to explain everything. He needed to know about the dead body that just appeared in my house. But I ultimately decided against it and felt like I should go back inside and really make sure I was clear on the details before telling anyone about this absurd situation. I didn't have to return to the living room to come face to face with the dead this time. When I opened the door, I saw the dead woman had been joined by her husband. His corpse was laid out in my foyer. I jumped into the house and slammed the door behind me, not wanting to give my neighbors a chance to see what I was seeing. Another corpse. This time the man that had just been driven away in the back of the police car. I paced back and forth down the hallway to the living room. The recently dead husband and wife didn't move a muscle. How? That is all I could keep asking myself. How had he died? How did the corpse end up here? How was any of this possible? Were the cops in on it? Was I somehow being framed for a double murder? Panicked, I raced out of the back door to try and get some air to collect my thoughts. I collapsed into a wicker chair and ran my hands through my sweat-drenched hair. Once more, I was drawn from my thoughts by an unwelcome sound. The neighbor's dog was growling at me. Not the dead neighbor. The dog that belonged to the neighbor on the other side of the house. This dog, Pepper, I believed was his name, had always been the sweetest little thing. I had never heard so much as a yelp from him before. He was fixture of the neighborhood, the dog that everyone stopped to pet. And here he was growling at me like I was trying to tear his pups limb from limb. I rushed back inside. I found Pepper lying on the floor next to the dead husband. His tongue had rolled out of his mouth, and the vacant stare of death on his face. Confused more than anything, I returned to the back door and moved the curtains so I can see Pepper was still there on the other side of my neighbor's chain link fence. I could even make out the sound of his growling, and yet his corpse also decorated my floor. When the realtor first showed the house to me, there were two things that made me hesitant about purchasing it. One was the age of the house, the other was the unfinished dirt basement. It now seemed that the dirt basement was my salvation. I buried the bodies down there, all three of them. It was a long night. It got easier as time went on. It feels strange to say it, but I got pretty efficient at burying corpses. Each time I left the house, I would return to find the dead. I tried to limit how often I left, started using vacation days like it was going out of style, and had everything I needed delivered to the house. I tried to act like everything was normal, but it kept getting worse. One night, I fumbled my keys upon returning to the house and I could hear it inside. The footsteps walking around in the hallway. The second I opened the door, the person dropped dead and fell to the floor like my very presence had just killed them. At first I thought it was random. Who would be dead? But then I realized that I knew each and every one of them. My angry neighbor died a few more times in the house next door. He got back together with his wife a few weeks after I had driven her to the shelter. They still fought, but less often and less violent. If it was the real ones living next door, I had no idea what was buried in my basement. Sometimes I return home and find a dead relative or a friend from high school. I once held a phone conversation with a cousin while at the same time burying their body in the basement. I realized that I had even recognized the homeless man and the cat that started this all. The day before the cat died, I had stopped to the street to drop $1 into an empty coffee cup as he panhandled. Cat in hand, none of it made any sense. But for the sake of my own sanity, I just tried to accept my new living situation. And the notebook in the basement helped to explain it a little. As I was digging a grave for my second grade teacher, I struck something solid under the dirt. After a bit of work, I uncovered a small wooden chest. Inside the chest was a notebook. I gave up on the grave digging for the night and returned upstairs to my dirt-stained living room to read the whole thing in one sitting. It had been left there by the previous owner of the house. He introduced himself as David. It turned out he too was running an unlicensed cemetery in the basement. He recounted his years in the house and it sounded remarkably similar to mine. It started small, but before long he was overwhelmed with the human corpses his house seemed to create. As best he could tell from years of dealing with the problem, the house would latch onto whatever was in the forefront of your mind. It dug out the memory of a living thing, recreated them, and then when it no longer could hold control of the body, it would die. This usually took place when a stronger presence, i.e., an actual living individual, entered the house. It seemed he was prepared to go on living like this for some time. He talked about how he had already dug back up earlier graves and exhumed the bodies so he could dig deeper. He needed more room. There was no telling how many corpses were buried under the house. As David's story went on, it was clear that he was becoming more unstable. He talked about how he had cut off everyone he knew and hadn't left the house for years. But it didn't matter, the dead didn't stop. He started to find them when he would awake each morning. Sometimes he'd even hear them walking around the house during the twilight morning hours, only for them to fall with a thud when he would truly be fully alert. What finally sparked him into action was the morning he awoke to hands around his throat. The body the hands belonged to didn't die for a solid minute after David had opened his eyes. David tried everything he could to think to stop the house. He drove hundreds of miles away, but found that after going to sleep, he would always wake up back inside the house, with extra corpses to clean up for his trouble. He then tried lighting the house on fire and found it wouldn't light, not even the curtains. One desperate night, he took a sledgehammer to the wall only for the metal head to crack and break when it struck the wooden walls. Ultimately, David fell victim to the house. David's demise isn't covered in the notebooks. He stopped writing for some time before his death. The last entry talks on how he planned to bury the notebook in the basement with the dead bodies. This was the only place he could think of that future owners might find it. If he left it out in the open, surely any responsible realtor would have thrown it away. When I was being shown the house, the realtor told me of David's death. It was the reason the house was so cheap. After all, who wants to buy a house that someone has died in? Blunt trauma to the head. The official story was that he fell down the stairs and died from numerous blows to the head took along the way. Maybe it's true he simply slipped, or he could have been pushed by one of those things that walk my hallways when I sleep. I like to think that he escaped, that the David they found at the bottom of the stairs was just another corpse created by the house. But I know in my heart that isn't true. I don't know how much longer I have. I can't leave. The house fully has me within its grasp. But I'm not done fighting. I just don't think I can fight on my own. David tried to help. He laid out everything that he had learned about the house, but the information got to me too late. That's why I'm putting it all out here now. No one can say I didn't warn them about what they were getting into. You know the risks. Looking for roommates, only serious applicants need apply.
I've never felt so much pain before. It was a Sunday afternoon and pretty hot here in North Alabama. My dog was playing in the yard and my son inside playing video games. I didn't mind that I lived in a little brick house in the middle of nowhere. It was just the thought of being alive that counts. I remember exactly what I was looking at when I felt it. I was looking at the mailbox and wondering, why is it such an ugly color? When my leg went numb, I guess I was in shock at first because I didn't feel it. But after a few seconds later, the most blinding pain I've ever experienced in my life hit me. It was so bad that I screamed with everything I had and leaped for the door. I was in the Marines and deployed in Iraq in 2004, so I'm not a pussy when it comes to pain. My son was already in the living room when I stumbled inside. I looked at him and nodded my head, signaling for him to grab the first aid. My head was spinning at this point, and none of the first aid supplies seemed to slow it down from feeling worse. So we called 911. I think I passed out because there's a gap in my memory, but I do remember being in the hospital for a few days. They kept trying to figure out what had bit me. The bite of my leg was no bigger than a mosquito bite, but hurt like a bullet wound. The doctor concluded that I was bitten by a spider, and had some sort of reaction to it. That's when it happened. The side effects. My son had gone back to his mother's house, and I leaned against the kitchen counter with a beer, wondering what that was. I stood back up straight to walk into the living room when I jumped back into shock. My daughter was sitting at the kitchen table. She was sipping tea and reading her favorite book. I mumbled her name and she got up with a smile and walked into the living room. I chased after her yelling her name, but when I turned the corner, there was nothing. My daughter died before I had my son. She'd be 16 years old now, but she died when she was 11. I was almost in shock at that moment, wondering what I was going to do. I searched the house desperately, but found nothing. Just the dark, lonely face of a sad house. I decided that I must have been deprived of sleep, so I decided to go to bed. I think I woke up around 3 or 4 a.m. with a dry mouth. Usually when this happens, I get up and get some water, but this time, for some reason, I was too scared to. It was almost like my instincts told me not to. My mind gave me every scary thought possible until I finally decided to sit on the side of my bed to think clearly. I sat up and did this when I heard a raspy old voice behind me say, "Hey son, where do you think you're going?" He had a deep country accent, and I thought the sounding voice that sounded too familiar. Dad? I spun around to see my clock ticking and my American flag hung up on the wall. What the fuck? Was all I could manage. You see, my dad was a tough countryman that could survive just about everything except his smoking habits. He owned a large part of land, and when he died I got a piece, which I used to build the house I'm in now, and was in. I didn't like my dad that much. He cared more about himself and being an asshole than being a dad. I got up and walked to the bathroom for my water, because his voice might have come from me being half awake, but it was so real. I walked into the bathroom, flipped on the light, drank some water from the sink, and looked into the mirror. I saw my face in the mirror, but something didn't feel right. And then I noticed my dad's smiling face peering around the shower curtains, which were right behind me. I yelled and swung at the curtains for my fist to only go straight into them, without hitting anything on the other side. My dad's face was gone. I woke up the next morning wondering who I should tell, if anyone at all, but I didn't want to sound crazy, even though I think I am. My life has now turned into a living nightmare. It's now consumed by voices and sights of dead people with the occasional phone call. These phone calls usually have sad piano music playing in the background, reminding me of a funeral. There's always a grin-sounding old lady reading off the endless list of names until I hang up. It confused me at first until I started recognizing some of them. They were all the names of dead people. I'm now huddled in my room, locked away in my house. I see dead people walking around outside now, and every time I pick up my phone to call someone, it's just the same old lady reading off names with the music. I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. Me and my best friend Jack went out one evening to our local park with our girlfriends. When we got there, it was still light outside, as it was every evening. As 20-year-old adults do, we decided to play a good old-fashioned game of hide and seek. We let the girls go first because, you know, ladies first and all that. They went off to hide and we waited a few minutes at the bottom of the hill so they could hide. The park we were at was surrounded by a small forest-like area, which is thick with trees and bushes and has a load of areas to hide in. As we looked, it started to get darker and darker, making it very hard to find them. We looked in this thick area with low-hanging trees and thicket. The branches were so low, we actually had to climb over them in order to go deeper. We turned our flashlights in on our cell phones to assist us in looking. Eventually the sun had gone down, it was completely dark, and it took us ages to find the girls. 40 minutes in total. Then I saw Jack's light disappear. I found the girls after a few seconds, and we called to Jack to tell him the news they'd been found. We call and call for about a couple of minutes as we come out of the trees and onto the path where we started. A few seconds later, Jack comes running down from the top of the hill, panting and confused. We asked what had happened, and he said that 1 minute he was looking for the girls. The next, he was passed out on top of the hill, with 2 sets of glowing red eyes staring right at him. He found his phone a couple of meters away and ran down the hill. Note that this guy does not run for anything, unless he has to. We examined him, and he said he was sore. He had scratches on his back and arms, and a huge red patch on his chest. He also happened to be wearing a ring with a satanic symbol on it. I'm not quite sure if the whole event was to do with a strange ring he had bought hidden away in a gift store years beforehand, or just a strange occurrence. Opinions? I was 5 years old when the shadow people started visiting me. At first, they just stand in the corner of my room while I slept and watch over me. The gray people make your body freeze while they're there. You can only move your eyes to stare at them. Other than that, you're frozen in pure terror. I told my parents about the shadow people when they first showed up, but of course they wrote it off as a jacket hanging on the doorknob or a shadow caused by the drapes. They told me to pray and it would go away. I tried this for years, but the thing is you can't move your mouth when the shadow people are there. I whispered a prayer through my lips and shut my eyes, but I would still know it was across the room staring at me. I started having night terrors in 4th grade. My parents had split up and lived on a farm out in the hills. My 4 brothers and I slept in our mom's cousin's basement. I would wake up in the middle of the night and be frozen. I didn't see the shadow people here because I had a top bunk, but I could feel their ominous presence. The next year my mom moved back in with my dad and I got my old room back. I would lay awake at night in that queen-sized bed and stare at the walls, feeling the gaze upon my back. This went on for a couple years. As long as I ignored them, it was okay. Then we moved into the slave house. The slave house, as one of the youngest brothers dubbed it, I'm the oldest of 7 kids now, was an old red brick house that a rich white banker had built in the middle of an all-black neighborhood just before the mid-century riots. Apparently he had what the realtor called servants. My brother called it slave house, however, because the people they saw running around their bedrooms at night, the shadows would run up the slave stairs and into their rooms and back all night. You see, this house had a strange layout. The upstairs was where the master had stayed and had his bedroom, and a separate bedroom, and then down the hallway there was a door with a lock on the wrong side. He'd had the ability to lock his slaves into their side of the house. They could access the kitchen and the washroom downstairs, but all the doors on the slave side of the house that led outside required a key to unlock the deadbolt from inside. The brother, just younger than me, and I had our beds where the master's children had slept downstairs. We too were able to lock the door to the slave side of the house. It was in this room that I had my first close encounter with a shadow person. I woke up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason and turned away from the wall to look around the room. I froze. Standing at the side of my bed was a gray shadow person with the most frightening face. I'd never seen the face of one up close before. They normally stood in the shadows where their faces were obscure. They talk about fear of the unknown being the most scary, but no. This face was pure horror. Its twisted features were evil, feasted on my fears as I lay there, paralyzed. I closed my eyes and waited until I felt the heat of the sun on my eyelids before opening them. I moved away from college and the shadow people disappeared for a while, but not because they were gone. I didn't sleep most of my first semester. I'd stay up with my girlfriend or watch TV. I'd found that if I fell asleep when I wasn't trying, I didn't see the shadow people. I started drinking Monster at night so I'd be able to stay up multiple days in a row. Finals came up and I figured I should get some sleep. I called my girlfriend up and had her on speaker on my phone all night. I woke up around 3:30 that morning to a rattling noise. I was frozen, but I got words out to my girlfriend, waking her on the other end of the line. "They're back." "They aren't real, baby. You'll be okay." "They are real." I could hear the rattling on the door. They were down there. The rattling got louder as I got more scared, frozen on my bed. "Can you not hear that?" "Hear what?" I could barely hear her voice over the rattling. My girlfriend talked me down and the rattling subsided. I took deep breaths to calm my nerves. We moved in together and I didn't see the gray shadow people for years. Even when she went away for work, I never saw them. I could feel their presence, but I never had to bear their awful faces. Then one day, I was taking a bath and I fell asleep. I felt like I left my body. I could see my body below me in the tub. Face submerged. Beside me, one of the gray people stood with scissors. I looked down and a string connected me to my body. He was trying to cut it. I jumped back into my body and flung my head out of the water, gasping for breath. I haven't seen the gray people since. Though they are the most terrifying things to the world. Part of me wants to relive that terror. Guess I'm twisted. Okay, I'll tell you a story. When I was 13, I went to the northern region of my country, Chile. Here, the north is hot, very hot. We went camping with my family. Mom, cousins, brother, aunts, and uncles. Outside the city, where no one goes because the beach has wild waves, too dangerous to swim. We were all born in the coast, so we know how to handle the harsh tides. Most of my cousins were older than me, but there was a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, both boys, and a 4-year-old girl. We told them scary stories, and the adults scolded us pretty badly. The 7-year-old Lucas was hyperactive. Even asleep, he moved a lot. He couldn't sleep alone either, so the teenagers took turns every night to sleep with him, because the adults wanted to stay awake until 2 a.m. And it also worked as a punishment for telling the youngest one scary stories. When it was my turn to sleep with him, it was only the two of us in the tent. I was tired and went to sleep earlier. He'd squeezed me every time he heard a noise, asking if their stories were actually real. I said they weren't, so he should be afraid, and he was going to be okay with me. I woke up around 3 a.m. I was alone in the tent. It was silent. I was supposed to be in the tent with my little cousin, my brother and my older cousin Christian, who was 22. I freaked out and went out of the tent looking for Lucas. I thought he went to the parents' tent, but he wasn't there. My brother and my oldest cousin were in the van, sleeping with one earphone each. I thought Lucas might have gone to pee. So I looked around the rocks, told myself he should have woken me up. Then I found him, staring at the ocean. He was shaking. Nights in the north are really clear, and the stars make it easy to see in the dark. "Lucas, let's go back to the tent," I said. He didn't respond and started crying. "The ocean isn't that scary at night. Come on, we have to..." I stopped when I saw the silhouette of a big man approaching my little cousin. I ran to grab him and he screamed in terror. I took him in my arms and ran to the camp to wake up the adults. None of them did, no matter how hard I tried. I yelled, I slapped them. They didn't wake up. The man arrived at the camp with Lucas in my arms. I ran to the highway. The pebbles were hurting my bare feet, but I didn't care. I went on with the hope of seeing a car pass by. I tripped. I couldn't stand up anymore. Lucas was hugging me so strongly. I could feel his fingers desperately clinging to my back. I told him I couldn't stand up like that I would take him in my arms once I was standing. The man was approaching. I couldn't feel my legs. My cousin crying, begging me to protect him. I couldn't breathe. The man grabbed my shoulder and shook it. "Give me the boy," he said. I lifted my arm and yelled, "You won't take him! I'll kill you!" Out of nowhere, I had a knife in my hand.
I was going to stab that man. He shook my shoulder again. I opened my eyes. It was Christian. Lucas and I were in the tent. He was crying, squeezing me so hard I couldn't breathe properly. I had my right arm raised, just like in my dream, but my hand was empty. Lucas and I had the same nightmare. When I was about 5, I'm 13 now, my family lived in a house that was built over 100 years ago. I only ever saw anything strange once. I was in my bed. I had a bunk bed at the time, and as usual, my parents were downstairs, and the landing light was on. My bedroom light was off. I remember it was quite late. I was just about to drift off when I heard the landing light click off. I opened my eyes to see that the landing light was now off. I was confused because I could still hear both my parents talking downstairs. Then something caught my eye, and by the door of my now dark bedroom, I saw a lady wearing a posh dress. Or rather, the shadow of a posh lady wearing the dress. Just the shadow. In my young age, I assumed the shadow was my mother. "Mum?" I said quietly. The shadow advanced forward. "Mum?" I said a bit louder. It was then I could tell this was not my mother. I screamed, causing my parents to run upstairs. They entered my room and turned in the light, and the shadow disappeared. I'm not lying, I know what I saw, and that was the only time I saw it. Another thing to note is the house had a basement that got sealed off before we could move in. I have more questions than answers, but I'm sure that something happened in that basement back when it was built, and that shadow had something to do with it. Okay, so recently a lot of weird shit has been happening at my grandparents' house. To start off with, I stay there a lot. I'm only 15, so when your parents can't get their shit together, you have to stay somewhere. I'm gonna try and keep this story short, because like I said, this is all recent. Anyways, let's get to what's been happening. It started when me and my sister went fishing at a creek behind their house. Mind you, they lived in the middle of fucking nowhere. This is all in New Market, Alabama, so if you want to look this place up, you can, because I'm not lying when I say it's in the middle of nowhere. Back to the story. When me and my sister, who's younger than me, were walking the trail back to my grandparents' house, my sister started acting weird. When I asked her why she was acting so paranoid, she said that she thinks there's someone watching us. She pointed behind us to the tree line to, sure enough, see a tall, creepy-looking man in the tree line watching us with his hands on his knees. I am a guy, but even so, this sort of freaked me out a little bit. It took me back to when my parents would talk about the New Market cult that terrorized them when they were kids. They both lived within a mile of each other at the time. Me and my sister got back to my grandparents' house pretty safe. Sadly, this wasn't the only thing that happened. It only got worse. The next thing I actually got on video. If y'all know how to post snaps on Reddit, please tell me, because the only reason I got this app is to tell the story. I still remember, I looked at the clock and it was exactly 3:34 a.m. I was talking to my friends on PlayStation. The room I was in the back of the house, closest to the cult. I was home alone and pretty tired at the time. If anyone lives near me, then you know how foggy it was Easter morning. I actually didn't hear the sound at first. I have soundproof headphones, so it was my friends that heard it. They told me to video it, so I walked outside and I did. The sound almost sounds like a wounded cow. I would say that it was a cow, but the problem is that first off, the cows aren't allowed at night. And two, the cows weren't even living there at the time. They take them to a different farm every month so they can eat fresh grass. The scariest thing about it was the noise kept getting closer. So close in fact that at one point I was in my grandparents' backyard. It even got as bad as me waking up to scratching noises at roughly 4 a.m. I don't get scared very often, but this was terrifying. Nothing has happened since, but I'll update if something does. If I figure out how to post that snap too, I will. Update. Anyways, I went looking for this cult last night, and it wasn't very hard to find them. The reason I went at night was because I had a baseball practice after school, and by the time I got home, the sun was going down. I invited Greg over, and we went together. I'm not a weak guy, pretty athletic, but Greg's just big. He's already 6'3" and only 14 years old. Me and him grabbed our knives and walked along New Market Road. It isn't a long walk, just a few houses down. We reached a dirt road and headed down that. The road leads into different pastures, fields, and ponds. It's really relaxing, almost to the point that you forget what's really out there. It's a long walk down a steep hill that leads to a flat pasture. The dirt road that leads along the creek that connects to the Flint River. We walked along the creek for about an hour and didn't see anything. The only thing that kept us from leaving was a sinking feeling of being watched. It may have been my paranoia, but I swore someone was watching us ever since we stepped on that dirt road. Everything was pretty chill until we reached the tree line. This tree line was really thick and almost impossible to walk through if you had wanted to due to all the thorn bushes. I remember a story that my mom told me when she was little about how she went to pick a rose from a thorn bush. She was 7 then. A man jumped out of the thorn bush and chased her back home. No one believed her when she had told her parents. I wondered if that same bush was in front of me. Around that time, everything got real quiet. The birds, frogs, crickets, and even the animals stopped making noises. I remember how me and Greg stopped talking and looked at each other. I could tell he was scared but tried to hold it. It was like fear was just there. Our instincts told us to run anyway. We were looking at each other when we heard a snap in the woods. We spun our heads to see a tall man with a deer skull over his face. The world slowed down, and my mind raced 1,000 thoughts per minute. This man was right behind us and had one hand on a little tree, pulling himself around to see us clearly. A scream jolted from us, from our trance of fear, and we ran for the hills. After the scream, the bushes started moving, but we didn't stick around to see what came out. It probably took us about 5 minutes to run an hour-long walk. I couldn't feel anything but the tingling of my adrenaline as I raced alongside Greg for my life. We stopped at an abandoned dry cleaners and sat in the parking lot, asking ourselves what to do. And Greg had tears in his eyes, and I was a bit shook also. We debated whether we should call the cops or keep it to ourselves. I told him not to, but he called the cops anyways. They only searched the grounds for about 15 minutes. The only thing they found were ashes from a fire in the woods, but put it off as campers. They acted like they did, but I could tell that they didn't by our story. Greg went back to his house, and I went back to mine. That was yesterday. Today I'm home alone, and really not looking forward to it. If this cult comes to me, I got a shotgun waiting for them. I know this sounds bad, but if they break in or threaten me in any way, I'll probably shoot them.
My life was just about perfect. As close to it as it could be without actually being so. I was young with a promising career ahead of me. The love of my life by my side. The whole world at my fingertips. I was 23 years old. Not a care in the world. I'd enjoy all the milestones of my young life. But for one, I was yet to be a father. Your mother and I had tried, and we had tried, and we had tried for 2 years. For those 2 years, our attempts had been in earnest. But we were young enough that we figured we didn't need to rush. We both had the realization that something was wrong about the same time. So I took your mother to the doctor. It was then that we'd learned that your mother was unable to have children. The revelation was devastating, to say the least. We lived our life by some kind of loose plan. But this was the first time a specific point it had been denied to us. Even still, with more credit to your mother than anything, we pushed through it. We began looking into alternatives, and soon landed on adoption. It's a long process, adoption. Between the adoption agency, the lawyers, meeting prospective families from whom we might get a child, we ran ourselves ragged. The stress of it all, I'm sad to admit, put a strain on our marriage. That's when she came. I remember it was a Wednesday. Just about 2 in the afternoon, your mom and I were eating a late lunch when we heard a knock on the door. Standing on our porch was an attractive, fancy-looking woman dressed in all white with a briefcase in hand, who informed us that she was aware of our predicament. When we asked how she came to know of it, she told us she was a consultant with the adoption agency we'd been going through. She introduced herself as Lillian, and asked if we can open to speak with her for just a few moments. In hindsight, I would have slammed the door in her face, but I didn't. I invited her in, and the 3 of us sat down in our living room. She told us how sorry she was for our difficulty in having children, and laminated the frustration of both being a client and of working for an adoption agency. Then she asked the question that changed our lives forever. What if I told you that you two could indeed have a baby of your own? Your mother and I were equal parts skeptical and intrigued.
Lillian told us that if we were interested, she could make possible our chances of having our very own child. Obviously, this sounded suspicious, but your mother and I agreed that we would never forgive ourselves if we hadn't heard her out. She opened her briefcase and retrieved 2 small vials of dark liquid. She told us that if we consumed this liquid, it would enable your mother to get pregnant. She told us that we would have a happy, healthy baby, and that we could have as many as we wanted. She then told us that on our children's 16th birthday, they would go through a change that normal children don't go through. This change wouldn't hurt them, that it would cause them no pain at all. Lillian told us that she offered this only to hopeful parents whom she felt truly deserved it, to people who she felt would give a child a good home. If I didn't stress it enough before, please understand that our inability to have a child had really taken a toll on us. It seems so foolish in retrospect, an utterly ambiguous deal with what was made to sound like a minimal consequence. In truth, she took advantage of our grief, our frustration, our pain. She manipulated our vulnerability and our desire to have a child, and we fell for it. We accepted the deal. The liquid in the vial I drank was all but flavorless. We drank it, and that was it. There was no feeling. It was as if we drank a vial of water. Lillian wished us well and went on her way. We've only seen her 1 time since then. Soon after that day, we learned that your mother was pregnant. We were ecstatic, to say the least. Just under 9 months after that, your mom gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. We named her Jenna. I'm sure this will come as a shock to you learning that we had a baby before you. We didn't have you until Jenna was 12. So it's not unreasonable that you don't remember her. Over the years, you've mentioned certain memories, and I'm sorry to say that I've done all I could to erase any trace of Jenna from them. I'm truly sorry, Catherine. Anyhow, as Jenna's 16th birthday approached, your mother and I speculated on what would happen. The surreality of the encounter with Lillian so many years earlier took our minds to wild places. We wondered if she was going to grow wings, if she was going to turn to a giant, all sorts of outrageous scenarios. On the morning of her birthday, your mother and I walked upstairs with breakfast for Jenna to enjoy in bed. When we opened her door, we expected to find her asleep. Instead, we found her standing in the center of her room, simply staring at the door. At us. There was nothing immediately noticeably different about her, but something was off. The tone of her voice, maybe. It was a long time ago, and I've done everything I can to block that day out of my memory. So please excuse any lack of particulars. You, me, and your mother sang happy birthday and gave her breakfast, and she gave us a half-hearted thank you. That whole morning, though, all she could focus on was you. Her eyes rarely left yours. She would whisper things to you, and you would look at her confused. I only heard one thing she said to you that day. We'll meet again. I promise. We will serve her together. I think it was at that moment that I knew the girl we'd raised, the beautiful, smart, funny kid, caring girl we'd loved for 16 years. She was gone. Around noon, she took a change of clothes into the bathroom and turned the shower on, assuming she left out the window immediately. And she was gone for about 3 minutes. What happened then, I remember as clearly as I remember yesterday. She came back through the front door, and she was covered in blood from head to toe, as if she'd swam in a pool full of it. She stepped into the living room where your mother and I were. We were in shock. She had no expression on her face. She was just indifferent to the situation entirely. But her face was different. In a way, it was angry, twisted. Her eyes were bigger, and instead of a gorgeous blue, they'd always been, they were cloudy white with flakes of red. Then in walked Lillian, dressed all in black. Say goodbye, dear, Lillian said to Jenna. What Jenna said, it felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Yes, mother. Jenna walked up to me and gave me a hug, but it wasn't her. It was like she had never hugged anyone before, like she had to read about it somewhere and was trying it for herself for the first time. I was too afraid to move, so I just stood there awkwardly as she finished with me and did the same to your mother. Thank you for raising me. Goodbye. There is no emotion in her voice. It was completely wooden, completely void of any personal connection we may have once shared. Lillian ushered Jenna out of the house and looked back at us. "You've done well. We will meet again." And with that, she left. Once I snapped out of my paralyzing fear and confusion, a few seconds later, I ran out of our front door, but it was too late. They were gone. We called the police and told them what had happened, and we found out what Jenna had done when we thought she was stepping in to take a shower. In our neighborhood, there were only 2 houses that she'd gone to. One was a house 2 away from ours, the other was about 3 blocks away. The police say she attacked at random, just whichever person she saw first. She slaughtered. They never even found the victims' hearts either. What really stumped them was the exact same thing happened at 12 other houses spread across town, and in the next town over, and the next town after that, all at just about the same time. The victims were butchered, left in the middle of circles made of their own blood. Also with their blood were various symbols drawn on the walls. Investigators initially thought it was some kind of coordinated attack, and that there were multiple predators who struck simultaneously. But all the witnesses, and there were a lot of witnesses, said they'd only seen one person. A young woman, long brown hair, pretty, between 5'2" and 5'4". When showed a picture of Jenna, they all confirmed beyond a shadow of doubt that it was she who had attacked their loved ones. When looking into Lillian, investigators found that no such woman had ever been the employer of, or in any way connected to, any of the adoption agencies we'd interacted with 16 years prior. They never found another trace of Jenna from that day forward. It was as if she'd vanished from the face of Earth. Once we were able to leave town, we moved across the country, to this house. That brings me to you, my beautiful Catherine. Your birthday is in 2 days. On that day, something is going to happen to you. Even after everything, I can't begin to speculate as to what that something may be. But nevertheless, it will. I can only assume Lillian will return for you. No matter what happens, your mother and I will always love you. Always. Nothing will ever change that. So please, don't think that's what's happening now means anything different. I know you weren't expecting to spend the days leading up to your birthday locked in the basement, chained to the wall, but I hope the room I built provides you at least a little bit of comfort. I can only imagine how scary and confusing this must be for you. I hope you understand that we can't let anyone else get hurt. All we wanted was a child of our own, and we love the children we had. We love you deeply, unconditionally. I hope you don't hate us. If I would have any idea what was going to happen to Jenna, I would have done what I'm doing now, back then, with her. We just needed a baby. Catherine, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine what goes on inside you when it happens. I would take all of it on myself if I could. I have no doubt that Lillian is going to return. When she does, I will do everything I can to keep you from her. I am sorry to all the people who were hurt by my decision we made all those years ago, but I will never say I regret it. Your mother and I have to cherish every single second we've got to spend with you, and we're going to do whatever we can to keep you here with us. I love you, sweetheart. We both do. I'll never forgive myself if you have to go through this, or for Jenna having to go through it. And it keeps me up at night knowing I have 2 more daughters to whom I may very well have to write the same letter to in just a couple short years. Only they'll remember what happens with you. Arya and Cassie love their big sister so much. Whatever happens on Wednesday, please just try not to hurt anyone. And if you see Jenna, please tell her we love her and miss her. I'll bring food down for you at 6 p.m. Love you always. Your father. Wow, that was a crazy story. I hope you guys really enjoyed that. If you can do me a favor and just smash that like button and subscribe if you already haven't. I'd recommend hitting that bell icon while you're at it, because I'm posting these daily, so that way you're at least notified when I do post it. My time frame when I do post them is kind of random, but I'm hoping to kind of get on a more stable track of, probably around 3 p.m. my time zone. I think it's Central Time Zone, so that'll probably be happening soon. Alright, you guys take it easy. Bye.